Chapter 1. The fracture in the void, the hyperspace lanes had always been humanity's lifeline, arteries of light threading through the infinite dark, binding colonies, fleets, and civilizations together. But tonight, aboard the dreadnought Erebus Ascendant, those arteries trembled as though the universe itself recoiled from what was about to unfold. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of reactor cores buried deep within the ship's armored spine. Admiral Kalen Veyer stood at the command dais, his eyes locked on the shimmering projection of hyperspace. It was not the calm, crystalline lattice the crew had trained to navigate. Instead, it writhed, fractured veins of energy twisting like serpents, threatening to snap. Every officer felt it in their bones. Hyperspace was breaking. "Status," Kalen demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the oppressive quiet. "Sir," replied Commander Rin Solen, her hands trembling over the sensor console, "the lattice is destabilizing. Our dreadnought's masses, it's shattering the corridor. We're forcing hyperspace to bend beyond its tolerance." The words hung heavy. Humanity's dreadnoughts were colossal, forged to be unstoppable engines of war. Their hulls carried entire cities, their weapons could vaporize moons. But no one had foreseen that their sheer existence might rupture the very medium of travel itself. Kalen's jaw tightened. And the alien world, the projection shifted, revealing a besieged planet at the corridor's far end. Its surface burned with scars of orbital bombardment. Cities lay in ruin, defensive shields flickered like dying embers. Around it swarmed the enemy fleet, an armada of biomechanical leviathans, their hulls pulsing with organic light, tightening the noose. The alien world's desperate transmissions had reached humanity weeks ago, pleading for salvation. Now, salvation itself threatened to tear the universe apart. "They won't last another cycle," Rin whispered. "If we don't break through, they're finished." Kalen's gaze swept across his crew. Each officer bore the same haunted look, the knowledge that their mission was both salvation and annihilation. To save the alien world, they had to force their dreadnoughts through hyperspace, even if it shattered the corridor forever. If hyperspace collapsed, humanity's empire would be severed, isolated colonies adrift in the void, doomed to die alone. The admiral's voice dropped to a low growl. "Prepare the fleet. We breach hyperspace now." The dreadnought's engines roared, vibrating through steel and bone alike. The hyperspace corridor convulsed, its crystalline walls splintering into jagged shards of light. Crew members clutched consoles as alarms shrieked. The sensation was indescribable, like falling through infinity while being torn apart molecule by molecule. Kalen gripped the command rail, refusing to flinch. He had seen worlds burn, fleets annihilated, civilizations erased. But this was different. This was the universe itself screaming. "Admiral," Rin shouted over the chaos. "The corridor is collapsing behind us. If we continue, there will be no way back." Kalen's eyes burned with resolve. "Then we don't go back." Outside, hyperspace shattered like glass. The dreadnought's hull carved through the void, leaving trails of broken light. Smaller escort ships followed, their frames groaning under the strain. One frigate disintegrated instantly, its atoms scattered across dimensions. Another twisted into a spiral of impossible geometry, vanishing with a scream that echoed through every mind aboard. The fleet pressed on. At the far end, the alien world loomed larger, its cries of desperation bleeding through calm channels. The enemy armada turned, sensing the breach. Biomechanical leviathans surged forward, their organic hulls glowing with predatory hunger. The siege tightened. Dreadnoughts had seconds to emerge or be swallowed by hyperspace collapse. Kalen's voice thundered across the bridge. "Weapons hot, shields to maximum. Humanity's dreadnoughts will not falter." The crew obeyed, their fear transmuted into grim determination. Plasma lances charged, rail cannons aligned, missile bays opened like the jaws of titans. The dreadnoughts were ready to unleash hell. But hyperspace had one final scream. The corridor shattered completely, exploding into a storm of fractured dimensions. Time itself stuttered. For a heartbeat, the crew saw infinite reflections of themselves, dying, surviving, screaming, silent. Then, with a deafening rupture, the fleet burst free into real space. The alien world filled the viewport, scarred and burning, its defenders barely clinging to survival. The enemy Leviathans turned in unison, their organic weapons glowing with lethal intent. The siege had reached its climax, and humanity's dreadnoughts had arrived, shattering hyperspace itself to answer the call. Admiral Kalen Vayer raised his hand, the weight of 1,000 worlds pressing upon him. Fire! The void erupted in light. End of Chapter 1. Would you like me to push Chapter 2 even deeper into the chaos, detailing the first clash between humanity's dreadnoughts and the biomechanical Leviathans, with brutal, suspenseful combat that tests the limits of both technology and survival? We need to write Chapter 2 of 12. The story so far. KALN leads humanity, Dreadnoughts through hyperspace collapse to save an alien world under siege by biome Chanical Larome and 6 Athens. Chapter 1 ended with fire. Chapter 2 must be very long, incredibly detailed, suspenseful, and build extreme tension. Output only narrative text. No preamble. We need to continue from the moment of firing. Describe the first clash in brutal detail. Focus on the chaos, the alien world, the Laroman 6 Athens, the Dreadnoughts weapons, crew reactions, tactical decisions, and the desperate siege. Build tension through close calls, losses, and the overwhelming enemy. Keep KALN as focal point, but also show other characters. Use sensory details, sounds, visuals, vibrations. Show the alien defenders reacting. Maintain high stakes and suspense. Chapter 2. The first fury, the command to fire did not echo. It detonated. Kalen's hand descended, and the hammer of Saul, the lead dreadnought, a kilometer of forged titanium and neutronium, answered with a roar that shook the bones of every soul aboard. 40 plasma lances, each the length of a city block, vomited streams of stellar fire into the void. The beams did not simply strike, they tore. The lead Leviathan, a bulbous, pulsating mass of chitin and weeping orifices, its surface slick with bioluminescent veins, absorbed the first volley with a shudder. Its outer layers vaporized into clouds of ionized ichor, revealing a ribbed inner hull that seemed to writhe like muscle. But the second volley struck before the first had finished. Rail cannons, mass drivers firing depleted uranium slugs at a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the exposed tissue, each impact sending shockwaves that rippled across the Leviathan's hide. The creature screamed, not a sound in vacuum, a psychic shriek. It lanced through the bridge of the hammer of Saul, bypassing shields and hull, stabbing directly into the minds of the crew. Kalen felt it as a red-hot needle driven through his frontal lobe. He staggered, gripping the command rail so hard his gauntlets creaked. Around him, officers collapsed, clutching their heads, blood trickling from noses and ears. Ridden, his tactical officer, fell to her knees, her cybernetic implants sparking as she fought to filter the assault. Shield harmonics shift to theta band, Kalen roared, his voice a weapon against the psychic pain. The ship's AI responded, and a low-frequency hum enveloped the bridge, damping the telepathic intrusion. The crew gasped, straightened. But across the fleet, not all were so lucky. On the Indomitable Will, the entire command crew went into seizures. The ship veered wildly, its plasma lances firing into empty space. On the last respite, a junior officer tore out his own eyes before a medic subdued him. The Leviathans had not merely attacked the hulls, they had attacked the minds. Kalen forced his vision to clear. The alien world, they called it Kithra's Mercy in the fragmented transmissions, hung below, a bruised sphere of oceans and continents scarred by orbital bombardment. Its atmosphere glowed with the fires of dying cities. The Defenders, a fleet of sleek, crystalline ships that looked like frozen lightning, were being systematically dismantled. One of their cruisers, its hull a lattice of blue-white energy, was caught in the grip of a Leviathan's tentacles, organic cables thicker than the ship itself, lined with suction cups that glowed with corrosive acid. The cruiser's shields flickered, failed, and the tentacles crushed it like a glass ornament. The crew's screams, transmitted on an open channel, were cut short as the ship imploded. "Admiral," Rin's voice was raw, "the enemy is adapting. Their shields, if you can call them that, are regenerating faster than we can burn through, And they're sending a second wave from the far side of the planet. Kalen's eyes swept the tactical hologram. The biomechanical armada was vast, dozens of leviathans, each the size of a dreadnought, plus hundreds of smaller organisms. Sickle-shaped fighters that moved like swarms of piranha and bloated spore ships that drifted behind, their bellies distended with unknown payloads. The siege had been methodical. They had encircled Kithra's mercy, cutting off all escape, and were now systematically dismantling its defenses. The crystalline fleet had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered 10-1, and their weapons, pure energy lances that could slice through normal matter, seemed to have little effect on the Leviathan's organic resilience. Humanity's dreadnoughts were different. They were built for annihilation. All ships, formation Delta Niner, Kalen ordered. Concentrate fire on the lead Leviathan. Overwhelm its regeneration. I want that thing turned into a cloud of organic debris. The fleet responded. 12 dreadnoughts, each a floating fortress of human engineering, shifted into a wedge formation, their broadsides aligned. Escort cruisers and destroyers fanned out to protect the flanks. The Hammer of Saul took point, its forward batteries cycling for another salvo. But the Leviathans were not idle. The wounded creature, its innards exposed and smoking, began to change. Its surface rippled, splitting along seams that wept black fluid. From the wounds, new appendages emerged, whip-like tendrils tipped with glowing barbs, and a central maw that opened like a blooming flower, revealing a throat lined with crystalline teeth. It was adapting, evolving in real time. "It's learning our weapons," Rin said, her voice tight. "The plasma lances are less effective on the new tissue. It's developing a heat-resistant carapace." "Then we hit it with kinetics," Kalen said. "Full broadside, all rail cannons, target the maw." The order was relayed. On the Hammer of Saul, the deck vibrated as the massive rail cannons, 12 of them, each capable of accelerating a tungsten rod to a significant fraction of light speed, locked onto the Leviathan's open mouth. The creature seemed to sense the threat. It closed its maw, but too late. The rod struck, a dozen simultaneous impacts that punched through the closing tissue and detonated inside the creature's core. The Leviathan's body convulsed. Its internal fluids, superheated by the kinetic energy, expanded explosively. The creature swelled, its chitinous plates cracking, and then it burst. A geyser of organic debris and boiling ichor sprayed into space. The shockwave rippled outward, slamming into the nearest Leviathans, causing them to recoil. For a moment, there was a gap in the enemy line. "Push through," Kalen shouted. "Drive for the planet. We need to link up with the defenders." The dreadnoughts accelerated, their engines flaring blue-white. The Hammer of Saul led the charge, its point defense batteries spitting streams of flak at the sickle fighters that darted in to intercept. One fighter, its body a sleek curve of bone and metal, slammed into the indomitable Will's shields, detonating in a shower of acid. The shields held, but the acid splattered across the hull, eating through armor plating. Damage control teams scrambled, spraying neutralizing foam. The planet grew larger. Kalen could see details now. The cratered surface, the glowing ruins of a city that had once been a glittering metropolis, the desperate flashes of ground-based defenses firing at orbiting targets. A crystalline ship, a frigate, its hull cracked and leaking light, limped toward the dreadnoughts, broadcasting a frantic signal. To the human fleet. "This is Commander Veth of the Kithran Defense Force. We thought you were a myth. Your arrival, it is a miracle, but beware the Swarm Mother. She is emerging from the deep. She will consume your ships." The transmission cut off as a Leviathan, larger than any other, rose from behind the planet. It was not merely a creature. It was a cathedral of flesh and metal, its surface studded with spires that pulsed with malevolent light. Its maw, large enough to swallow a dreadnought whole, opened, and from it emerged a swarm of smaller organisms, not fighters but parasites, each the size of a shuttle, their bodies covered in hooks and tendrils. The Swarm Mother had arrived. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Kalen ordered. "Do not let those things attach to your hull. They'll breach and consume the crew." The dreadnoughts scattered, but the parasites were fast. They swarmed the last respite, latching onto its hull with their hooks. The ship's shields flickered as the parasites began to dissolve the armor with enzymatic secretions. Alarms blared. The captain of the last respite, a grizzled veteran named Orin, made a decision. He vented the outer compartments, blowing the parasites into space, but the damage was done. The ship's structural integrity was compromised. It listed, its engines sputtering. "Admiral, we can't save them," Rin said, her voice hollow. "The Swarm Mother is charging something. A weapon, energy readings off the scale." Kalen looked at the tactical display. The Swarm Mother's maw was glowing, a ball of sickly green light forming between its crystalline teeth. It was a directed energy weapon, but unlike any human design. It was biological, a fusion of organic chemistry and quantum mechanics, designed to unravel matter at the molecular level. All ships focus fire on the Swarm Mother's maw, disrupt the charge. Now. The dreadnoughts turned, their weapons cycling. Plasma lances, rail cannons, missile salvos, every weapon they had was aimed at the colossal creature. But the Swarm Mother was not defenseless. Its spires emitted a field of distorted space, bending incoming fire around its body. Most shots missed. Those that hit were absorbed by layers of ablative tissue that regenerated almost instantly. The green light intensified. The Swarm Mother was about to fire. Kalen knew he had seconds. He looked at the planet, at the desperate defenders, at his own fleet, battered but unbroken. He made a decision. "Rin, target the last respite's reactor core. Overload it. Use it as a kinetic missile." Rin's eyes widened. "Admiral, there are still survivors aboard. There won't be if that weapon fires. Do it." The order was given. The last respite's captain, hearing the command, understood. He ordered his crew to the escape pods, but there was no time. The reactor overloaded. The ship detonated in a fusion fireball, its debris, white-hot chunks of metal and plasma, hurling toward the Swarm Mother. The creature's distortion field could not deflect solid matter moving at such velocity. The debris struck its maw, disrupting the charge. The green light flickered, died, and then exploded in a cascade of uncontrolled energy, tearing a chunk out of the Swarm Mother's face. The creature recoiled, its psychic scream echoing across the fleet. The parasites detached, drifting aimlessly. The Leviathans paused, their coordination disrupted. "Now," Kalen roared. "All ships full advance." "We break through to the planet." The dreadnoughts surged forward, their engines burning at maximum. The Hammer of Saul led the way, its hull groaning under the strain. The Swarm Mother, wounded and enraged, lashed out with tentacles, but the fleet was too fast. They slipped through the gap, descending toward the atmosphere. The planet's defenders, the crystalline ships, rallied. They formed a protective screen around the dreadnoughts, their energy lances firing at pursuing Leviathans. The siege was not broken, but it was cracked. Humanity had arrived, and the battle for Kithra's mercy had entered a new, desperate phase. Kalen allowed himself a single breath. Then he turned to Rin. "Get me a channel to the Kithran commander. We need to coordinate and prepare for ground assault. The Swarm Mother will not stop until every human in Kithran is dead." Rin nodded, her face pale but resolute. The dreadnoughts entered the upper atmosphere, their hulls glowing with re-entry heat. Below, the burning cities of an alien world awaited, and above, the Swarm Mother, its maw healing, began to descend. The true siege had only just begun. The roar of re-entry was not a sound. It was a physical force. A fist of compressed, superheated plasma hammering the hull of the Hammer of Saul so hard Kalen's teeth vibrated in his skull. The bridge viewports glowed molten tangerine. So bright the reinforced transparasteel seared afterimages into his retinas even through the automatic dimming filters. Alarms blared across the command deck, a cacophony of hull breach warnings, reactor temperature alerts, and incoming fire proximity pings that the damage control teams had half muted, their voices tight and clipped over the comms loop as they fought to keep the dreadnought from tearing apart mid-dive. "Rin, status on the Kithran channel," Kalen barked, his voice rough from the psychic echo of the Swarm Mother's scream still lingering in his mastoid bone. He didn't turn from the tactical display hovering above his command chair. where the wounded Leviathan silhouettes swarmed the upper atmosphere like angry wasps, their tentacles lashing out at the Dreadnoughts' trailing escort. Rin's fingers flew across her comms console, her brow furrowed so deep a crease etched between her eyebrows. A trickle of blood ran from her left nostril, smudging the edge of her earpiece. She'd been fighting the Kethran's native psychic frequency for 10 minutes straight, the crystalline resonance of their fleet's comms twisting her neural implant into a throbbing knot. Their encryption is tied to their bioluminescence, Admiral. I'm having to reverse engineer the wavelength from the energy signatures of their cruisers. 1 more minute, maybe less. A tremor racked the deck beneath Kalen's boots, hard enough to send a stack of datapads clattering to the floor. The damage control team lead's voice crackled over the comms, sharp with panic. Engineering reports a hull breach on Deck 17. Something punched through the ablative layer. Looks like swarm tentacle fragment, still twitching. It's chewing through the bulkhead. We've got plasma leaking into the crew quarters. Seal the deck, Kalen ordered without hesitation. Vent the atmosphere if you have to. Don't waste personnel on a section we can't save. Keep the descent engines at maximum output. He didn't need to say why. If they slowed even a fraction, the swarm mother would catch them before they hit the cloud layer, and the planet-cracking beam it had been charging before the last respite detonated would turn Kethra's Mercy into a glowing crater before they could get a single boot on the surface. The tactical display pinged, a new contact blooming in the upper atmosphere, bright blue and sharp-edged against the red and black of the swarm's signatures. Kethran Fleet, sir, the tactical officer said, relief bleeding into his voice. 12 cruisers, 40 fighters, holding the line against the Leviathan swarm. They're hailing us. Rin's fingers stuttered across her console, then she jerked her head up, blood now dripping from both nostrils. Got it. Channel open. The bridge speakers crackled, and a voice filled the room, not spoken so much as resonated, layered with the faint harmonic hum of crystalline speech that made the fillings in Kalen's teeth ache. It was sharp, cold, stripped of all warmth. Unidentified vessel, you breached the blockade. State your designation, your intent, and the reason you destroyed a swarm scout vessel with a fusion warhead that nearly took out our outer defense platform with the backlash. Kalen leaned forward, his voice steady, projecting calm he didn't feel. This is Admiral Kalen Voss of the United Earth Navy, commanding the 1st Dreadnought Flotilla. We're here to break the siege. We destroyed the swarm vessel to stop it from firing a planet-killing weapon at your world. We have no intent to occupy your territory, only to eliminate the swarm presence here and assist with civilian evacuation. There was a long silence, broken only by the distant crump of a Leviathan detonating against a Kethran cruiser's gravity shield. When the voice came back, it was still cold, but edged with something like shock. You are the first non-swarm vessel to break the blockade in 72 of our solar cycles. We have received no word of human fleets operating in this sector. Your claim is unsubstantiated. Stand down or we will fire on you. Before Kalen could reply, Rin tapped his shoulder, her face pale. Admiral, I'm pulling the colonial manifest from the research outpost your fleet was sent to check on. There were 300 human colonists here, xenobotanists and geologists deployed 6 months ago. They're listed as missing, presumed dead after the swarm first bombarded the surface. She hesitated, then added softer, my brother is on that list, Joran Rin. Kalen's jaw tightened. He'd known the outpost was here, had assumed it was destroyed long before the siege began. He'd briefed his crew that their only mission was to assist the Kethran, who'd sent a desperate hyperspace burst 3 weeks prior begging for aid, any aid, before their world was consumed. He hadn't known there were humans still alive on the surface. Vera, he said, using the name the Kethran commander had used in her initial transmission, a guess pulled from the comms log Rin had been scanning. We have personnel of our own on your surface. If you fire on us, you kill your own people and ours. The swarm is right behind us. We don't have time for mistrust. Another pause, longer this time. The tactical display pinged again. Another Kethran cruiser had taken a Leviathan tentacle to its bridge, its gravity drive sputtering as it fell out of formation. "Vera here," the Kithran commander said, her voice tighter now, the cold fraying at the edges. "We have held this siege for 12 of your weeks. We have lost 80% of our fleet, 90% of our above-ground infrastructure, and 7 million of our people. We have no reason to trust any off-world vessel. But—" She paused and the hum of her voice dropped, almost quiet. "We detected human life signs in the southern hemisphere, in the shelter complex beneath the capital of Lithos, 3 days ago. We thought they were swarm mimics. If you are here to get them out, we will coordinate. But if you lie, we will drag your dreadnoughts down to the mantle with us." Kalen exhaled, a short, sharp breath. "Agreed. Now give me a sitrep. What's the swarm's current strength? Where are your civilian shelters located? And how long until that thing behind us can fire that planet-cracking beam again?" Vera's response was a stream of data that scrolled across Kalen's tactical display, paired with her voice, tight and urgent. "The swarm mother is wounded, but its regeneration rate is 300% faster than our models predicted. Its maw will be fully healed in approximately 8 of your minutes. It has laid an estimated 400,000 eggs in the planet's upper mantle. If it finishes burrowing to the core, those eggs will hatch in 72 hours, releasing a spore cloud that will sterilize the entire surface in 24. We have 12 million civilians huddled in 17 underground shelter complexes. 3 have already been breached. The primary shelter in Lithos, where your human colonists are located, has 90 minutes of structural integrity left before the swarm drones chew through the blast doors. Our fleet is at 30% combat capacity. We cannot hold the line for much longer." The bridge went silent, the weight of the numbers settling over every crew member like a shroud. 8 minutes until the swarm mother could fire again. 90 minutes until the Lithos shelter fell. 12 million lives hanging in the balance. Kalen's jaw tightened. "All ships adjust descent trajectory. We're dropping straight for Lithos. Kithran fleet form a protective screen around our dreadnoughts. We'll provide heavy fire support. You handle the Leviathans and clear a path through the swarm drone swarms. Rin, patch me through to the Lithos shelter commander. We need to get those civilians out now." The dreadnoughts groaned as their descent engines flared, the hulls glowing so bright they left trails of ionized plasma in the thick, spore-choked atmosphere. Below, the planet was a vision of desolate beauty. The once iridescent purple crystal forests of Kithra's Mercy were shattered, their shattered shards glinting like broken glass in the firelight of burning cities. The methane oceans glowed a sickly neon blue, choked with swarm carcasses and the twisted wreckage of Kithran civilian shuttles. The sky was a roiling mass of green spore clouds and swarm drone swarms, so dense they blotted out the stars. A tremor racked the hammer of Saul again, harder this time, and the lights flickered. Jax, the chief engineer, his face streaked with grease, and an old burn scar running from his jaw to his ear, slammed his fist on the comms panel. "Admiral, engineering reports the tentacle breach has chewed through Deck 16. We've got plasma leaking into the crew mess hall. If we don't divert power to seal it, the whole section will blow out and we'll lose 20% of our remaining damage control teams. Divert 40% of engineering power to the breach," Kalen ordered, his voice flat. "Keep the descent engines at 110%. If we slow down, we all die. Tell the crew in that section to get to the escape pods. If they can't make it in time, vent the deck." Jax hesitated, his jaw working, then nodded. "Aye, Admiral." The tactical display pinged again, a new contact blooming fast, large and angry, right on their tail, the swarm mother. Its maw was already knitting back together, the torn flesh bubbling and fusing, the green light of its planet-cracking beam pulsing faintly through the gaps in its carapace. It was healing faster than Vera had predicted. Kalen's throat went tight. "All ships, fire at will on the swarm mother's maw," he ordered. "Don't let it finish charging." The dreadnoughts' railguns bellowed, streams of tungsten slugs slamming into the swarm mother's face, blowing chunks of its flesh off. The Kithran cruisers added their gravity lances. beams of concentrated spatial distortion that sizzled as they tore through the swarm's carapace. The swarm mother screamed, the psychic shockwave so strong it blew out 3 viewports on the Hammer of Saul, sending 2 crew members flying into the bulkhead. The charge of its beam flickered but didn't die. It was at 30% and rising. Rin's comms panel lit up, a priority transmission from the Lithos shelter. She tapped it, and a voice came over the speakers, sharp, strained, the sound of plasma fire and screaming in the background. It was a Kithrin warrior, her voice tight, her armor cracked, a gaping wound in her side. "This is Commander Sira, Lithos Shelter 7. We have 12,000 civilians huddled in the lower levels, 200 of my warriors left standing. The swarm breached the upper blast doors 10 minutes ago. We're holding them at the second level, but we can't hold for more than 5 minutes. The drones are pouring through the ventilation shafts. If you're coming, you need to be here now. Over." Kalen leaned into the comms. "This is Admiral Voss. We're 2 minutes out. Hold the line. We're dropping ground forces directly into the shelter complex. Just hold on." He cut the transmission, then turned to Rin. "Prep the drop pods, all 200. Load them with 2nd Marine Battalion, medics, engineers, enough heavy weapons to hold off a swarm armada. We're dropping them now before the swarm mother can charge its beam again. Admiral, the pods won't have time to reach the surface before the swarm mother fires," the tactical officer warned. "The Leviathans are swarming the drop zone. We'll lose 60% of the pods at least." "Then we lose 60%, Kalen said, his voice iron. "The other 40% get to those civilians. Launch the pods." The hangar bays of the dreadnoughts opened, and 200 drop pods screamed out, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they plummeted through the atmosphere, trailing fire behind them. The swarm mother saw them and lashed out with a tentacle, sweeping 3 of the pods out of the sky like they were insects. The remaining Leviathans dove after the rest, their jaws snapping, parasites spitting from their maws. The Kithrin fleet peeled off to intercept, their gravity lances tearing the Leviathans apart, but 2 more pods were destroyed in the crossfire, their occupants incinerated before they could even eject. The remaining pods adjusted course, some of them listing, their heat shields cracked, spiraling down toward the burning city. One slammed into the crystal plaza of Lithos, exploding on impact, but the Marines inside survived, bursting out of the wreckage, plasma rifles firing, cutting down the swarm drones swarming the area. Sira saw them from the 2nd level of the shelter, her heart leaping in her chest. She thought they were alone, that no one was coming, that the swarm would eat every last one of her people. She raised her plasma lance, signaling her remaining warriors to fall back to the blast doors, to cover the Marines as they fought their way down to the shelter levels. One of the human Marines, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, a photo of a young girl taped to his rifle, waved at her, and she nodded, the faintest hum of recognition passing between them, no words needed. The Marines reached the 2nd-level blast doors just as the swarm drones broke through the barricade Sira's team had set up. Plasma fire erupted on both sides, the air thick with the smell of burning carapace and acid. The Marine with the photo tossed a grenade into the drone swarm, blowing them apart, then kicked the blast door control panel. The doors shuddered, then groaned open, revealing the huddled masses of civilians, Kithrin of all ages, their crystalline skin glowing faintly with fear, young children clinging to their parents, the elderly sitting in wheelchairs, their legs shattered from falling debris. Sira stepped forward, helping a young child whose arm was bleeding from a drone sting, when she saw the Marine kneel down in front of an old Kithrin female, handing her a medkit, his own leg bleeding from a drone bite. The old female touched his arm, her crystalline skin glowing soft blue in gratitude, and the Marine smiled, a small, tired thing. Sira felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight with fear and anger for 12 weeks. These humans weren't here to conquer. They were here to help. Back on the bridge of the Hammer of Saul, Kalen's blood ran cold. The tactical display was flashing red, the Swarm Mother's energy signature spiking so high it was blinding. Vera's voice came over the comms, sharp with terror. "It's charging the planet-cracking beam. 10 seconds to fire. If that thing hits the surface, the entire continent of Lithos is gone. No survivors. No civilians, no your colonists, no my people." Kalen stared at the display, his mind racing. If he ordered the fleet to focus all fire on the Swarm Mother to disrupt the charge, the remaining Leviathans would break through the Kithrin screen and start picking off the drop pods, the ground forces, the civilian shuttles as they tried to evacuate the shelter. If he held fire to cover the ground forces, the Swarm Mother would fire, and 12 million people would die in 10 seconds. "All batteries target the Swarm Mother's maw," he ordered, his voice so cold it was unrecognizable. "Divert all power from point defense to main cannons. Fire for effect. Do not hold back. Rin, patch me through to the ground force commander. Tell them we're drawing the swarm's fire. They have 90 seconds to get every civilian onto the evacuation shuttles before the swarm redirects its attention to the surface." The fleet opened fire, every railgun, every lance, every missile screaming toward the Swarm Mother's face. The Swarm Mother screamed again, the psychic shockwave blowing out 2 more viewports, sending 3 crew members crumpling to the floor, their noses bleeding, their ears ringing. The beam's charge flickered, dropped to 70%, then started rising again, faster this time as the Swarm Mother's flesh knitted back together, the damage from the last respite's debris forgot. "Sir, main cannons are at 100% charge," the weapons officer shouted. "But we're not piercing its carapace. The shots are just bouncing off." "Spinal cannon," Jax's voice came over the comms, rough with smoke. "We got the experimental antimatter spinal cannon online, Admiral. It'll punch through that carapace no problem. But it'll drain the entire power grid. We'll be dead in the water for 20 minutes, no engines, no shields, no weapons. We'll be a sitting duck." "Fire it," Kalen said, without hesitation. The hammer of Saul's spine glowed bright blue, then erupted in a beam of pure antimatter so bright it outshone the sun, slamming straight into the Swarm Mother's maw. The creature's scream was so loud it shattered the remaining intact viewports, the antimatter blowing the entire healing chunk of its face off, sending streams of green ichor spraying into the atmosphere. The planet-cracking beam's charge dropped to 0, the green light flickering and dying. But the hammer of Saul went dark. The engines died, the shields dropped, the lights went out, replaced by the faint red glow of emergency lighting. The dreadnought stopped dead in the sky, then began to fall, slow at first, then faster, heading straight for the center of Lithos. "All hands abandon ship," Kalen ordered, his voice steady. "Rin, get me Vera. Tell her we need her to catch our escape pods with her gravity tugs. Jax, get the engineering team to the escape pods. I'm staying until the last crew member is off." Vera was on the channel in seconds, her voice tight. "We see your dreadnought falling. We can catch the pods, but we can't catch the ship. It's going to hit the city." "I know," Kalen said. "But there's debris from the last respite still in the upper atmosphere, right? Chunks of ablative metal and plasma still hot. Have your cruisers used their gravity tugs to redirect that debris field into our descent path? It'll slow us down enough to miss the city, crash into the ocean instead." Vera was quiet for a second, then said, "It will leave our fleet exposed to the swarm for 30 seconds. We will take heavy losses." "I know," Kalen said again. "Do it." The Kithrin cruisers peeled off from the line, their gravity drives flaring, yanking chunks of white-hot debris from the upper atmosphere, hurtling them into the hammer of Saul's descent path. The debris slammed into the dreadnought's hull, embedding itself into the ablative layer, slowing its fall. The hammer of Saul slammed into the ocean 20 miles off the coast of Lithos, sending a tidal wave crashing into the shore, but the city was spared. The Kithrin cruisers caught every escape pod as it ejected, their gravity tugs softening the landing, setting them down on the beach outside the city. On the ground, Sierra and the Marines had gotten the last of the civilians onto the evacuation shuttles, the shuttles lifting off just as the swarm drones broke through the final barricade. The Marine with the photo helped Sira carry the injured child onto the shuttle, then turned to her, grinning. "Name S. Kale. Kalen's my cousin. He's gonna kick that big swarm bitch's ass." Sira smiled back, the faint blue glow of her skin brightening. "I believe he will." Back on the bridge of the surviving dreadnought Iron Will, which had picked up Kalen and the remaining hammer of Saul crew from the escape pods, Kalen watched the tactical display, his shoulders tight. The swarm mother was still, its maw healing again, the green light pulsing faintly. Vera's voice came over the comms, sharp with confusion, then terror. "Admiral, the swarm mother isn't retreating. It's burrowing into the crust, heading straight for the mantle. Sensors are picking up a massive energy spike 50 miles below the surface. It's not laying eggs anymore, it's birthing something." Kalen's blood ran cold. "What?" "It's trying to birth a new swarm mother in the planet's core," Vera said, her voice tight with horror. "The egg it laid is maturing fast. It will hatch in 48 hours. When it does, it will release billions of spores into the atmosphere, turning the entire planet into a swarm breeding ground. Then it will jump to the nearest habitable world. Your homeworld is 12 light-years away. My homeworld is 8 light-years away. We have 48 hours to stop it, or both our species are extinct." The bridge went silent, the weight of her words settling over every crew member like a tombstone. Outside the viewport, the swarm mother disappeared into the planet's crust, the green light of its beam fading into the rock. Somewhere deep below, something was waking up. Kalen gripped the command chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at Rin, at Jax, at the tactical display, at the burning planet below. He thought the siege was broken. He thought they'd won. He was wrong. The real battle had only just begun. Chapter 4. The Mantle Awakens. The Iron Will's bridge was a tomb of silence, broken only by the low hum of the Dreadnought's reactor. Every officer stared at the tactical display, watching the green pulse vanish into the crust of lithos. The swarm mother's descent was not retreat, it was metamorphosis. Kalen's jaw tightened as he leaned forward, eyes locked on the holographic projection of the planet. "If it births another mother in the core," he said, voice low, "we'll never stop it. The mantle will shield it from orbital bombardment. We'll be fighting blind." Rin's fingers danced across the console, pulling up seismic readings. The hologram flickered, showing tremors rippling outward from the burrowing monstrosity. "It's already destabilizing the tectonic plates. If it keeps digging, the planet's crust will fracture. Lithos will collapse into a volcanic graveyard before the egg even hatches." Jack swore under his breath, slamming a fist against the railing. "We're not just fighting for the people here. If that thing succeeds, it's a chain reaction. Every habitable world within jump range becomes a breeding ground. It's extinction, Admiral." Kalen's knuckles whitened on the command chair. He thought of Sira, of Kale, of the civilians crammed into evacuation shuttles. He thought of Earth, 12 light-years away, and the faces of billions who had no idea their annihilation was already ticking down. Vera's voice cut through the tension, sharp and clinical. "We need to go below. Orbital strikes won't penetrate the mantle. We'll have to take the fight into the planet's core." The words hung heavy. No dreadnought had ever attempted a mantle descent. The pressure alone would crush most ships. The Iron Will's hull was reinforced, but even it was not designed for such madness. Kalen turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the crew. "Options." Rin hesitated, then spoke. "We could deploy seismic penetrators, drill warheads designed for asteroid mining. If we modify them, they might reach the egg before it matures." Jax shook his head. "Too slow. The swarm mother will intercept. It knows we'll try to stop it." Vera's eyes narrowed, her voice a whisper of dread. "Then we go ourselves. We take the Iron Will into the mantle. We fight it where it hides." The bridge erupted in protest. Officers shouted, voices overlapping, warnings of hull collapse, reactor overload, magnetic field destabilization. Kalen raised a hand, silencing them. "Listen," he said, his voice steady but hard. "We don't have a choice. If we stay up here, we lose. If we go down there, we might die, but we might also win. And right now, that's the only chance we've got." The silence returned, heavier than before. Outside the viewport, the planet's oceans boiled where the swarm mother had burrowed. Plumes of steam rose like funeral pyres. The green pulse flickered faintly beneath the crust, a heartbeat in the dark. Kalen stood, his decision carved into his face. Prepare the iron will for descent. Reinforce the hull. Divert power to the gravitic stabilizers. We're going into the mantle. The crew moved, fear etched into their movements but tempered by resolve. As the dreadnought systems shifted, Sierra's voice came over the comms from the surface. Admiral, the civilians are clear. The shuttles are away. But the swarm drones are regrouping. They're converging on the city. If you descend, we'll be exposed. Kalen's chest tightened. He could hear the desperation in her voice. He could picture Kale, rifle in hand, standing against the tide. We'll buy you time, Kalen said. Hold the line. If we succeed, the drones will die with their mother. The comms crackled, then Sierra's voice returned, softer but resolute. Then we'll hold, for Lithos, for Earth, for all of us. The Iron Will's engines roared, the dreadnought tilting toward the planet's surface. The hull shuddered as it pierced the atmosphere, flames licking across its ablative plating. Kalen gripped the command chair, eyes locked on the tactical display. The green pulse was deeper now, buried beneath miles of rock. Somewhere below, the egg was maturing, its heartbeat accelerating. The descent began. The dreadnought plunged into the crust, its gravitic stabilizers screaming against the crushing pressure. The hull groaned, metal straining against forces no ship was meant to endure. On the bridge, alarms blared. Rin's hands flew across the console, stabilizing the reactor. Jax barked orders to engineering, rerouting power to the shields. Vera's eyes never left the seismic readings, her face pale. Kalen's voice cut through the chaos, steady and unyielding. Stay focused. We're not dying here, not today. The iron will descended deeper, the rock around it glowing red from the heat. Rivers of magma surged past the hull, licking at the shields. The dreadnought was a spear plunging into the heart of the planet. And then through the seismic haze, the sensors caught it, the egg. It pulsed with green light, massive and alive, its surface writhing as if something inside was clawing to escape. Kalen's breath caught. The sight was worse than he had imagined. The egg was not just a vessel. It was a living fortress, its surface bristling with swarm drones, their bodies fused into its shell. They moved in unison, a hive protecting its unborn queen. The crew stared, horror etched into their faces. Kalen's voice was a whisper, but it carried across the bridge. Target the egg. The Iron Will's weapons charged, the dreadnought's cannons glowing against the mantle's darkness. But before they could fire, the seismic reading spiked. The swarm mother was waiting. From the shadows of the mantle, its massive form surged forward, molten rock cascading off its carapace. Its maw glowed with green fire, its eyes burning with hunger. The Iron Will had found its enemy. And the mantle itself trembled as the battle began. We need to write chapter 5 of 12. The story so far. The Iron Will has descended into the planet's crust to find the SW Arm egg. The SW Arm mother appears. Chapter 5 must continue the battle, build extreme tension, be very long and detailed. Output only narrative text. Keep concise but detailed, no preamble. Focus on the confrontation, the crew's actions, the dreadnought's struggle, and the stakes. Use sensory details, internal thoughts, and technical descriptions. Build suspense. The Iron Will's main batteries roared, a trio of focused plasma lances that sliced through the molten rock and struck the swarm mother's carapace. The impact was catastrophic, a searing explosion that vaporized hundreds of tons of rock and sent shockwaves rippling through the mantle. But when the fire cleared, the creature was still there, its carapace cracked and oozing a viscous green ichor that immediately boiled in the superheated pressure. It let out a shriek that resonated through the hull, a frequency that bypassed the sound dampeners and drilled directly into the crew's skulls, paralyzing them for a full second. Kalen shook off the disorientation, his fingers digging into the armrests of the command chair. Again, continuous fire. Don't give it a moment to recover. The gunnery officer, a woman named Soren with cybernetic implants that linked her directly to the targeting array, complied. The dreadnought's secondary batteries, A dozen rapid-fire kinetic railguns unleashed a storm of depleted uranium slugs that hammered the swarm mother's flank. The creature twisted, its segmented body coiling like a serpent, and from its maw came a torrent of green fire. It struck the Iron Will's forward shields, the energy weapon not a laser, but a stream of hyperaccelerated spores that ate through the shield grid molecule by molecule. Shield integrity at 67% and falling, Rin reported, her voice taut. The spores are corrosive. They're attaching to the hull. Jax, reroute coolant to the forward emitters. Overload them if you have to. We need to shed that contamination, Kalen ordered. Jax's voice came back through the intercom, strained over the roar of machinery. Already doing it, Captain, but the heat exchange is maxed. If I push coolant any faster, the reactor will trip. Then trip it and restart. I'd rather drift in the dark for 30 seconds than let that thing eat through our armor. The Dreadnought shuddered as the forward shields flickered and died. A section of the hull, exposed directly to the spore stream, began to glow orange. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off 3 compartments. Vera's seismic sensors screamed. The swarm mother was moving, diving into the magma below them, vanishing from visual range. "Where is it?" Kalen demanded. Vera shook her head, her fingers dancing over the holographic projections. "The magma is masking its heat signature. It's using the planet's own thermal currents to hide. I'm reading something at 2 o'clock, but it's faint." "It's baiting us," Kalen muttered. "It wants us to follow it deeper." The egg pulsed behind them, the green light intensifying. On the tactical display, the maturing embryo's neural activity had spiked. It was almost ready. The drones fused to its shell began to stir, their legs twitching, their eyes glowing with the same sickly luminescence. "They're detaching," Soren said, her voice flat with shock. "Hundreds of them, they're launching from the egg's surface." The drones were not flying. They were swimming, propelling themselves through the molten rock with powerful strokes of their chitinous limbs. Each one was the size of a ground vehicle, their carapaces shimmering with the same corrosive spores. They converged on the Iron Will from all directions, a tide of living projectiles. "Point defense, full saturation," Kalen snapped. The Dreadnoughts CIWS systems, a network of automated laser turrets and flak cannons, opened fire. The mantle around the ship turned into a hellscape of exploding shells and vaporized rock. Drones burst, their innards flash-boiling into clouds of toxic gas. But for every one destroyed, 3 more took its place. They were relentless, sacrificing themselves to weaken the ship's defenses. One drone slammed into the port side, its claws digging into the ablative plating. It began to gnaw, its mandibles scraping against the hull with a screech that echoed through the bridge. The emergency seals held, but the pressure was immense. A second drone followed, then a third. The ship listed to port as the added mass dragged it sideways. "Fire aft thrusters full burn. We need to shake them off," Kalen ordered. The engines roared, the ship shuddering as it accelerated upward. The drones clung, their claws gouging deep furrows into the armor. One of the hangar bay doors buckled and a gout of plasma erupted from the breach. The internal atmosphere vented and the bay's emergency door slammed shut, trapping a dozen maintenance crew inside. Kalen's jaw tightened. There was no time to mourn. "Vera, give me a seismic pulse. I want to know where the mother is." Vera triggered a low-frequency burst and the data came back almost instantly. "Below us, directly below." "It's ascending, fast." The swarm mother burst from the magma, its maw wide open, directed straight at the Iron Will's exposed underbelly. The green fire built in its throat, a swirling vortex of death. "Brace for impact," Kalen shouted. The fire struck. The shields flared, overloaded, and collapsed. The beam carved into the Dreadnought's ventral armor, melting through layer after layer. The bridge shook violently, consoles sparked, and the lights flickered. A chunk of the hull, glowing white-hot, sheared off and tumbled into the abyss. "Damage report," Kalen yelled over the din. "Reactor containment is stable, but we've lost aft weapons. The ventral armor is breached in 3 places." "We're taking on molten rock," Rin reported, her voice cracking. "The ship's integrity is at 73%. Kalen, we can't take another hit like that, Vera said, her eyes wide. Kalen stared at the tactical display. The egg was still there, pulsing, taunting. The mother was circling, preparing for another strike. The drones were still swarming, their numbers seemingly endless. The ship was a wounded beast bleeding into the planet's heart. He looked at the crew. Rin, with her steady hands. Jax, likely bleeding from the ears from the pressure. Vera, her face pale but her eyes defiant. Soren, her implants flickering as she recalibrated the remaining guns. "We're not running," he said, his voice low but firm. "We came here to kill that egg, that's what we're going to do." He turned to the helm. "Helm, bring us around, all power to the forward shields. We're going to ram the egg." Silence fell on the bridge. The crew stared at him. "Captain, that's suicide," Rin said. "The egg is hardened. The Dreadnought's hull won't survive the impact." "The hull won't have to," Kalen said. "We're going to break through the outer shell and then we're going to detonate the reactor." "A tactical overload. It'll vaporize everything within a kilometer." "That includes us," Vera whispered. "Yes," Kalen said, "but the egg dies. And the swarm mother dies with it." He looked at the timer on the display. The egg's maturation was at 91%. In less than 3 minutes, the embryo would be born. "Set course. Maximum acceleration. Arm the self-destruct sequence. We have one shot." The helmsman, a young ensign with trembling hands, set the course. The Iron Will's engines ignited, the ship lurching forward, straight toward the egg. The swarm mother saw the movement and came after them, its maw glowing again. Kalen's hand hovered over the self-destruct key. The ship picked up speed, the egg growing larger on the view screen. The green light was blinding now, the surface of the shell writhing with thousands of drones, all of them turning to face the incoming dreadnought. "All hands brace for impact," Kalen said. "It's been an honor." The swarm mother's fire struck the rear shields, but the ship was already past, the impact barely registering as the Iron Will slammed into the egg's shell. The crash was beyond anything the crew had ever felt. The ship's frame groaned, the bow crumpling as it penetrated the organic armor. Drones burst against the hull, their bodies splattering across the viewports. The lights died, the emergency generators kicked in, and the ship came to a grinding halt, embedded deep within the egg's flesh. Kalen's vision swam. He was on the floor, blood trickling from his brow. The self-destruct key was still in his hand. "Status," he croaked. "We're inside the egg, the reactor is stable. The self-destruct sequence is armed," Rin said, her voice barely audible over the groaning of the ship's tortured frame. The swarm mother's shriek echoed through the hull, so loud it broke the viewports. The creature was outside, trying to claw its way in, trying to protect its unborn. Kalen smiled grimly. He pressed the key. The countdown began, 10 seconds. The crew held their breath. The swarm mother's face appeared at the shattered viewport, its eyes burning with rage and something else, fear. The Iron Will's reactor breached. The explosion was a sun beneath the crust, a ball of pure energy that expanded outward, consuming the egg, the swarm mother, the magma, the rock, everything. The planet's surface cracked, a continent-sized fissure opening, and from it erupted a pillar of plasma that reached into space. The drones on the surface, the ones Sira and Kalen's brother were fighting, suddenly stopped. Their lights died. They collapsed lifeless. The siege of Lithos was over. But in the heart of the fire, a single pulse of green light flickered, then faded. The egg was dead. The mother was dead, but the swarm had not been silenced. Somewhere in the dark between stars, a signal was sent, a message of loss, of rage, and in a distant nebula, a hive awakened. Chapter 6. The signal in the void, the aftermath of the Iron Will's sacrifice lingered like a scar across the heavens. Lithos' skies still burned with plasma storms, the crust fractured into jagged continents drifting apart. The silence of victory was deceptive, too clean, too sudden. The swarm's drones had fallen, yes, but the pulse of green light that had flickered before vanishing gnawed at Kalen's surviving crew like a phantom heartbeat. Far beyond Lithos, in the cold abyss of the nebula known as the Veil of Ashes, the signal arrived. It was not a transmission in any human sense. It was a psychic scream, a resonance carried through hyperspace itself, vibrating across dimensions. The hive stirred. Dormant queens twitched in their cocoons. Vast bioships, slumbering for centuries, flexed their wings of chitin and plasma. The Swarm Mother's death had not ended the war. It had awakened something older, something deeper. On the battered deck of the Iron Will's sister ship, Resolute Dawn, Sira stood among the survivors. Her eyes, alien yet weary, scanned the horizon of Lithos. The fires were dying, but the people were broken. Refugees poured from shattered cities, their voices a chorus of grief. Humanity had saved them for now. But Sira's instincts screamed that the war was only beginning. Kalen's brother, Joran, approached, his armor scorched, his face hollow. "We bought them time," he said, voice hoarse. "But I felt it." When the mother died, something reached out. It wasn't just rage, it was a call. Sira's gaze hardened. "The hive will come, not here, not yet. But somewhere in hyperspace they are gathering. And when they move, it will not be a siege. It will be annihilation." Meanwhile, deep within the hyperspace rift carved open by the Iron Will's explosion, anomalies began to manifest. The rift was unstable, a wound in reality itself. Human dreadnoughts had shattered hyperspace before, but never like this. The fissure pulsed with green light, faint but insistent, as if something on the other side was clawing to break through. Admiral Vera, commanding the fleet from orbit, stared at the readings. "This isn't over," she whispered. "We've torn open a path for them, and they're coming." Her officers exchanged uneasy glances. Dreadnoughts had been humanity's ultimate weapon, designed to fracture hyperspace and strike at enemies across dimensions. But now that very weapon had become a beacon. The swarm knew where to strike. In the veil of ashes, the hive awakened fully. The nebula boiled with movement, colossal bioships unfurling, their hulls alive with writhing tendrils. Queens rose from their cocoons, their psychic voices merging into a single chorus of vengeance. The death of the Swarm Mother was not an end. It was a provocation. Humanity had declared war on the infinite brood, and in the center of the hive, a new entity stirred. Larger than any mother before, its consciousness spread across the nebula like a storm. It did not scream. It did not rage. It calculated, cold, deliberate, patient. The brood would not rush blindly into battle. They would wait, gather, and strike where humanity was weakest. Back on Lithos, Sira felt the tremor in her mind. She was not human, not entirely. Her people had once been prey to the swarm, their worlds consumed. She had survived by fleeing, by hiding among humans. But now the hive's awakening brushed against her consciousness like icy fingers. She staggered, clutching her temples. Joran caught her. "What is it?" "They know," Sira whispered. "They know humanity can break hyperspace, and they fear it, but fear in the hive is not weakness. It is hunger. They will come for the dreadnoughts. They will come for Earth." The tension across the fleet was unbearable. Every sensor sweep revealed anomalies in hyperspace. Every whisper of static carried the echo of the hive's signal. The soldiers who had celebrated victory now sat in silence, staring at the stars, waiting for the next war to begin. The dreadnoughts had shattered hyperspace to save one world, but in doing so, they had opened the door to 1,000 more battles. Admiral Vera summoned her commanders. "We are no longer fighting for Lithos alone," she said. "We are fighting for the survival of every world. The hive will not stop. They will come for us all. And when they do, our dreadnoughts will be the only line between existence and extinction." Her words hung heavy in the chamber. The officers nodded, but their eyes betrayed the truth. None of them believed survival was certain. In the silence of hyperspace, the green pulse grew stronger. The hive's signal was no longer just a scream of rage. It was a beacon, a rallying cry. Across the galaxy, hidden nests stirred. Worlds thought safe began to tremble. And humanity, standing at the edge of its greatest triumph, realized it had only lit the fuse of a war that would consume the stars. The dreadnoughts had shattered hyperspace. Now, hyperspace itself threatened to shatter humanity. Would you like me to make Chapter 7 escalate into the hive's first counterstrike, where humanity realizes the dreadnoughts themselves are being hunted, or keep the tension simmering with political intrigue and dread before the next battle? We need to write Chapter 7 of the story. The user provided a detailed prompt and the story so far. The user wants extreme tension, very long and detailed narrative. The chapter should escalate into the hive's first counterstrike, where humanity realizes the dreadnoughts themselves are being hunted. The output must be only narrative text, no preamble. We need to continue from the previous chapter. The last part mentioned the green pulse growing stronger, hidden nests stirring, and the dreadnoughts being hunted. So Chapter 7 should depict the hive's counter-strike, with the dreadnought S under threat. We need to build suspense, detail the attack, and show the stakes. Use POV from key characters. Admiral Vieira J. Oren Sierra, possibly a dreadnought captain. Describe the hive's new tactics, the cold calculation of the new entity. The chapter should be long, so include sensory details, internal thoughts, and the scale of the battle. We'll start with a scene of the fleet on high alert, then the attack begins. The dreadnoughts are the primary targets. Show the hive using a new weapon or strategy that exploits the hyper's pace shattering. Perhaps they send smaller, faster ships that can phase through the dreadnoughts' defenses. Build tension as the crew realizes the threat. End with a cliffhanger or a devastating loss. Let's write. Chapter 7. The hunters descend. The first sign came not from sensors, but from the void itself. Admiral Vera stood on the observation deck of the Sword of Saul, watching the assembled fleet drift in the amber glow of Lithos' sun. 3 dreadnoughts, 12 battle cruisers, 40 destroyers, 100 support ships. The largest concentration of human firepower ever assembled, and yet the weight in her chest felt like a collapsing star. The repairs were incomplete. The crews were exhausted, and every hour the green pulse from hyperspace grew stronger, more insistent, more organized. She had not slept in 72 hours. The stimulants kept her standing, but her thoughts had acquired a brittle clarity, edges sharp enough to cut. On the holographic display beside her, the tactical plot showed the fleet's formation, a defensive sphere around Lithos with the dreadnoughts at the core. The hive's attack on the planet had been broken, but the brood had not retreated. They had repositioned. Sensor ghosts flickered at the edge of the system, shapes that moved against the gravity wells then vanished. No confirmed contacts, no signatures that matched known swarm vessels, but the pattern was wrong. The hive did not skulk. They swarmed, unless they were learning. Admiral, Commander Delacroix's voice came through her implant, tight with forced calm. We have a containment breach on the Hammer of Faith, Cargo Bay 12. The bioscanners are showing. The transmission cut. Vera's hand flew to the command console. Report all ships. Report status. Silence, then static, then a scream cut short. Hammer of Faith, the second dreadnought, a kilometer-long fortress of tungsten and plasma, had gone dark. Not destroyed, not broadcasting distress, simply absent from the network. Its running lights still glowed in the telescope feed, but no data, no comms, no life signs emerged from its hull. Battle stations, Vera said, her voice flat. All ships, full combat readiness. Launch all fighters. I want a sensor net so tight a photon can't slip through. The klaxons began to wail across the fleet. On the Sword of Saul, crew members sprinted through corridors. Hatches slammed shut, and the thrum of reactors climbing to combat output vibrated through the deck plates. But in the observation bay, Vera did not move. She watched the Hammer of Faith drift, silent and perfect, a tomb in the shape of a warship. Aboard the Hammer of Faith, Ensign Taro Chen had been inspecting a faulty coolant valve when the lights went out. Not the emergency lights, not the battle lanterns, all of them. The entire bay plunged into absolute blackness, so complete it felt solid, like a weight pressing against his eyes. The emergency system should have kicked in within seconds. They did not. The backup generators did not engage. The battery-powered emergency strips did not glow. Even the bioluminescent strips on his own uniform, fail-safes designed to work without power, remained dead. He was blind. He was alone. And he could hear something moving. It was not footsteps. It was not scraping. It was a sound like wet fabric dragging across metal, accompanied by a low, rhythmic clicking that seemed to come from every direction at once. The air grew cold, then cold, then cold, frost forming on the valve handles, on the bulkheads, on his own breath as it crystallized in front of his face. He reached for his sidearm. The holster was empty. He had not drawn his weapon. He had not dropped it. The sidearm was simply gone. The clicking stopped. The dragging stopped. And then from directly behind him a voice spoke. It was not a human voice. It was a vibration, a resonance that bypassed his ears and spoke directly into the meat of his brain. "You are the first." Taro Chen did not scream. He could not. His throat had closed, his lungs frozen, his heart stopped. The last thing he saw, before the darkness consumed even his memory of light, was a shape that should not exist, a geometry of limbs and mouths and eyes that folded into itself like a collapsing dimension. And then he was gone, his body reduced to a fine organic mist that the shape absorbed without ceremony. The shape moved on. On the bridge of the Sword of Saul, Vera's tactical display erupted with alerts. "Multiple hull breaches on the Hammer of Faith," her sensor officer reported, voice cracking. "Not from external impact. They're opening from the inside, section by section. The atmosphere is venting, but the structural integrity is holding. Wait. No, it's not. The breaches are closing. Something is sealing them." "Get me a visual feed," Vera ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing a zoomed image of the Hammer of Faith. The Dreadnought's hull was covered in a dark, organic film, a substance that pulsed with a faint green light, spreading like a stain across the metal. Where the film touched, the ship's armor began to dissolve, not into slag but into something that flowed, a liquid metal that the film absorbed, growing thicker, darker, more alive. "It's consuming the ship," whispered the tactical officer. "My God, it's eating the hammer." "All ships open fire on the Hammer of Faith," Vera commanded. "Do not let that thing spread." "Admiral, there may be survivors." "There are no survivors. Fire." The fleet obeyed. Plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, and missile salvos converged on the stricken dreadnought. The first volley struck the organic film, and for a moment it seemed to hold. The green material rippled, absorbing energy, resisting. But the second volley punched through. The third shattered the film into fragments that writhed and twisted in the vacuum, still alive, still seeking. The Hammer of Faith exploded in a silent bloom of fire and debris, but the fragments did not disperse. They accelerated, moving with purpose, streaking toward the nearest ships. The destroyer Vigilant was hit first. A single fragment no larger than a human hand struck its bow. In seconds, the same black film spread across its hull. The same breaches opened. The same silent consumption began. "Destroy the Vigilant," Vera said, "and the Liberty, and the Stalwart, everything that's been touched. Burn it." The fleet obeyed again. Ships died by their comrades' hands, but the fragments were too many, too fast. They were not debris. They were spores, seeds of a new hive launched from the heart of the Hammer of Faith before it was destroyed, and they were hunting. On the Sword of Saul, Joran grabbed Sira by the arm as she staggered. Her eyes had rolled back, her body trembling, her mouth open in a silent scream. "They're here," she gasped. "Not the brood, something worse, something that thinks. It's inside the network, it's inside the ships." Joran dragged her toward the bridge. "How do we stop it?" "It's not a physical attack. It's a signal, the green pulse. It's not just a beacon, it's a weapon. It rewrites the firmware of ship systems. It opens doors. It shuts down failsafes. It makes the ships invite the spores in." "Can we counter it?" Sira's eyes focused, suddenly sharp. "The dreadnoughts, they're the only ones with quantum-shielded cores. The hive can't rewrite them, but the rest of the fleet," the Sword of Saul lurched. Alarms screamed. On the main screen, the tactical display showed a new contact, a shape that had emerged from hyperspace directly above the fleet, so large it eclipsed the sun. It was not a ship. It was a nest, a living structure of chitin and green fire, kilometers across, its surface covered in mouths that opened and closed in rhythmic hunger. The hive's first counterstrike had arrived, and it was not alone. Behind it, the hyperspace rift widened and 1,000 more shapes began to pour through. Vera gripped the arms of her command chair. "All dreadnoughts," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos, "prepare to shatter hyperspace. We're going to close that door." But even as she gave the order, she knew. The hive had not come to attack the fleet. They had come to capture the dreadnoughts, to study them, to reverse the weapon that had shattered their realm. The war had entered a new phase, and humanity was no longer the hunter. It was the prey. We need to write Chapter 8 of 12, continuing the story. The provided text ends with the fleet facing a massive hive nest and thousands of ships emerging from hyperspace. Vera orders to shatter hyperspace again, but the hive wants to capture dreadnoughts. Tension is high. The chapter must be very long, detailed, suspenseful. Output only narrative text. We need to pick up immediately after the last line. It was the prey. The chapter should show the dreadnoughts preparing to enter hyperspace, but the hive's countermeasures and the spores spreading. Focus on multiple perspectives, Joran and Sira on Sword of Saul, Ve-Ra on flagship, possibly other ships. Build extreme tension, time pressure, failures, sacrifices. The dreadnoughts have quantum-shielded cores but rest a fleet vulnerable. The hive's new weapon is the signal rewriting firmware. The Dreadnoughts Shatter Hyperspace weapon might be a last resort but could harm the fleet or the planet. Need to show the siege of the alien world. The story title says, Saving the Desperate Siege-Ridden Alien World, so the planet is under siege. But the immediate threat is the hive fleet. Perhaps the chapter ends with the dreadnoughts executing the shatter but with unexpected consequences. Let's outline Chapter 8. Opening. Immediate aftermath of the hive nest arrival. The fleet is in chaos. Space Orcs still infecting ships. Vera gives order to all Dreadnoughts to prime the shatter cannons. But the hive signal begins to interfere with the Dreadnought systems. They are quantum shield-ed but maybe not perfectly. CRRA senses something. The hive intelligence is trying to communicate or corrupt the Dreadnought's AI. Joran and CRRA work to protect Sword of Saul's Dreadnought core. On other ships, sacrifices, crews self-destruct to prevent spore takeover. The hive launches boarding pods or energy beams to disable dreadnoughts. Vera makes a difficult decision. She must sacrifice some ships to buy time. The Dreadnoughts align their energy weapons to create a hyperspace rupture. But the hive's nest is also emitting a field that stabilizes hyperspace, making it harder to shatter. The chapter culminates with the dreadnoughts firing a combined beam, but the hive counter acts with a green pulse that overloads some dreadnoughts. The hyperspace rift begins to close but not completely. The hive's mothership is damaged but not destroyed. End with a cliffhanger. The planet below is now vulnerable to a new attack, or something emerges from the rift. Need to maintain extreme detail. Descriptions of weapon effects, ship systems, alien biology, character emotions. Use sensory details, sounds, lights, smells in space, maybe via suits. Keep pacing fast but with deep immersion. Write in third-person limited, shifting between Vera, Joran, Sira, maybe a nom-a-less crewman. Let's write. Chapter 8. The chitin tied the bridge of the Sword of Saul was a cathedral of screaming alarms and strobing red. Joran had Sira braced against the command console, her fingers white-knuckled on the edge, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The tactical display above them was a nightmare. The nest dominated the center, a living moon of chitin and green fire, and behind it the hyperspace rift bled a torrent of smaller shapes, each one a hive ship, each one hungry. They're not attacking the fleet, Sira said, her voice a thin wire of clarity over the chaos. They're hurting us, look at the vectors. Joran forced his eyes to follow the tactical overlay. The swarm was spreading in a wide arc, not closing on the dreadnoughts but boxing them in, driving them toward the planet below. The siege-ridden world, the ASF called it Voreth's Mercy, hung in the lower quadrant of the screen, its surface pocked with burning cities and hive landing zones. The dreadnoughts were the only hope left, and the hive was pushing them into a kill box. Vera ordered the shatter sequence, Joran said. But we can't fire while the fleet is tangled with the spores. Sira shook her head. The spores are the least of it. The signal, the green pulse, it's not just rewriting firmware. It's learning, it's adapting to the quantum shielding. The dreadnoughts are still safe, but the protocols are being read. Every time we run a diagnostic, the hive sees the code. On the main screen, a split view showed the flagship Hammer of Saul, not the destroyed one, but the new flagship, a dreadnought named Sword of Vengeance. Vera's face was a mask of iron, her eyes fixed on the nest. Her lips moved, but the audio was lost in the static of jamming signals. All dreadnoughts, Vera's voice cut through the noise, a sudden clarity that silenced the alarms, locked targeting arrays on the nest's core. We're going to burn a hole through the rift and collapse it. Stand by for simultaneous discharge. Joran's hands flew across his console. Sword of Saul targeting lock confirmed. Dreadnought core at 93% coherence, shield harmonics stable. But Sira grabbed his wrist. No, look at the nest's surface. The mouths, they're not random. They're forming a pattern. A resonance cavity. He zoomed in. The chitinous surface was alive with peristalsis, thousands of mouths opening and closing in a synchronized rhythm. A low-frequency hum vibrated through the hull, felt in the bones. The green fire that licked the nest's surface began to pulse in time with the mouths. They're going to broadcast a counterpulse, Sira said. If we fire the shatter beam while they're emitting, the resonance will amplify and reflect. It'll tear our own dreadnoughts apart. Joran opened a channel to the flagship. Admiral, the nest is preparing a resonant countermeasure. We need to disrupt the pattern before we fire. Vera's reply was immediate. We don't have time. The second wave is already halfway through the rift. If we wait, we're surrounded. All dreadnoughts, initiate shatter sequence in 30 seconds. On the bridge of the Sword of Vengeance, Vera watched the countdown with a stillness that belied the storm inside her. Every instinct screamed that Sira was right, but the tactical calculus was brutal. The swarm was already forming a perimeter. In another minute, the dreadnoughts would be too close to the planet to fire without scorching the surface. The siege-ridden world had already lost 3 of its major cities. The hive was not here to conquer. It was here to harvest the biomass of an entire species. Admiral, her tactical officer said, the nest is modulating its emission frequency. It's matching our shatter beam's harmonic signature. It's predicting our firing solution, Vera said. It's reading our minds through the network. She looked at the secondary display. The fleet was a shambles. A dozen ships had been consumed by the spores. Their hulls were now black, lifeless, drifting toward the nest to be absorbed. The Liberty had been scuttled by its own crew, its reactor overloaded to prevent its capture. The Vigilant was a cloud of debris. The Stalwart was being boarded. Boarding pods made of living chitin had punched through its hull, and the screams of its crew were broadcast on an open channel before the signal died. All dreadnoughts, hold fire, Vera said. The bridge went silent. The tactical officer stared at her. Admiral, the swarm is closing. We have to, I said, hold. Vera's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a star. We're going to do something else. She turned to the comms officer. Open a channel to the Sword of Saul. Put the telepath on. On the Sword of Saul, Sira heard the words before they were spoken. She felt Vera's intention like a blade of light cutting through the fog of the hive's signal. She closed her eyes and let the dreadnought's quantum-shielded core hum through her bones. The hive is not intelligent, Sira said, her voice distant. It's a reflex, a hyperadaptive immune system. It doesn't think, it reacts. The signal we saw, it's not a weapon, it's a question. It's asking the ship's systems, what are you? And the systems answer. The hive learns the answer, then it finds the weakness. Then how do we stop it? Joran asked. We don't answer, we go silent. All ships, all systems, primary power down. No emissions, no signals, no life support. We become dead metal. Joran stared at her. That's suicide. The hive will board us. The spores will. No. The spores need a host, a live system. If we shut down everything, the ship becomes inert. The hive has no interest in inert matter. It needs interaction to spread. The question goes unanswered and the hive moves on. Vera's voice came through the channel. The telepath is correct. This is the only way. All ships, all dreadnoughts, prepare for total system shutdown. Primary reactors to standby. All power to the quantum cores only. The cores will maintain the shatter beam's capacitor charge, but nothing else. We go dark. The order rippled through the fleet. Captains who had fought for their ships for years, who had bled for every system, now had to kill their own vessels. Lights flickered and died. The hum of reactors faded. The atmosphere recyclers stopped. The Sword of Saul's bridge went black, save for the emergency glow strips and the soft blue light of the quantum core. The silence was absolute. On the tactical display, the hive fleet paused. The swarm, which had been moving with predatory precision, began to mill. The boarding pods retracted. The mouths on the nest's surface stopped their rhythmic pulsing. The green fire dimmed. The hive had lost its target, but the silence could not last. The dreadnoughts were blind, deaf, and helpless. The fleet's life support was a finite resource. The crews had minutes, at most an hour, before the cold and the lack of air killed them. "We have one shot," Vera said, her voice transmitted over a hard line that bypassed the ship's network. "The quantum cores are still charged. We can fire the shatter beam once, but we need to aim without sensors. We need to guess the nest's position." "I can see it," Sira said. "I don't need sensors. I can feel the hive. It's a pressure in my mind, a cold spot. It's directly above us, slightly to port. The rift is behind it at a 30-degree declination." Joran keyed the hardline. "Admiral, we have a targeting solution. Telepath-assisted. Bearing 270, declination 30. Range 8,000 kilometers." "Confirmed," Vera said. "All dreadnoughts, align your shatter beams to that bearing. Fire on my mark." The dreadnoughts' massive energy cannons, designed to rupture the fabric of hyperspace itself, began to rotate. Their quantum cores, the only system still active, hummed with a deep, resonant tone. The capacitors were fully charged, the energy of a star compressed into a single, devastating pulse. "Mark," Vera said. The sword of Saul fired. The beam was invisible, a lance of pure spatial distortion that tore through the vacuum. It struck the nest's core, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the chitin began to glow. The mouths that had been forming the resonance cavity shattered. The green fire erupted in a cascade of emerald lightning. The nest screamed. It was not a sound in the air. It was a vibration in the quantum field, a pulse of agony that passed through the dreadnought's shielded cores and into the minds of every telepath in the fleet. Sira collapsed, blood streaming from her nose. Joran caught her, holding her close as the scream faded. On the tactical display, the nest was breaking apart. The hyperspace rift behind it began to waver, to shrink. The swarm that had been pouring through the rift was cut in half. The ships already in real space were still there, but the stream was severed. The hive's reinforcements were trapped in the void. But the victory was not clean. The shatter beam had not only destroyed the nest, it had also destabilized the planet's gravitational well. Voreth's Mercy shuddered. Tidal waves rose from its oceans. The crust fractured, and from the dying nest a final signal emerged. Not a pulse, not a question. A message encoded in the quantum noise of the rift's collapse. It was not meant for the fleet, it was meant for something else. Sira's eyes snapped open. They called for help. They sent a ping. "A distress signal. It's already traveling through hyperspace." "Where?" Joran asked. She looked at him, her face pale and streaked with blood. "To the source. The hive's home space. The place we first shattered. They know we're here. They know what we are, and they're coming." The dreadnoughts floated in the dark, their crews gasping in the thinning air, surrounded by the wreckage of the nest and the silent swarm. The siege was broken, but the war had just begun, and the prey had been marked. Chapter 9. The signal that should not exist. The silence after the nest's scream was worse than the sound itself. It was the silence of something vast, something listening. The dreadnought crews felt it in their bones, a pressure in the marrow, as though hyperspace itself had turned its gaze upon them. Vera stood rigid on the command deck of the Sword of Saul. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "Status reports, all ships." One by one the dreadnoughts answered. Hull integrity compromised but holding, shields flickering, life support strained, telepaths incapacitated. The fleet was alive but barely. Sira, pale and shaking, whispered from the med bay where Joran held her upright. It wasn't just a distress call, it was a beacon, a coordinate. "They've triangulated us. We are marked in hyperspace." The tactical display flickered. The rift was collapsing, but not cleanly. Residual distortions rippled outward, like cracks in glass. Each distortion pulsed faintly, resonating with the signal Sira had sensed. "They're opening doors," she said, her voice breaking. "Not here, not yet, but elsewhere. They're building paths. They'll converge." The fractured planet Voreth's Mercy groaned beneath them. The oceans boiled with tidal upheaval. Cities on its surface, alien cities already battered by the siege, were crumbling into the waves. The survivors, those who had begged for humanity's aid, now faced annihilation from the very weapon that had saved them. Evacuation protocols, Vera ordered. Get their civilians off-world. Every transport, every shuttle, prioritize the young and the wounded. But the dreadnoughts were not designed for rescue. They were weapons, blunt and terrible. Their bays were cramped, their corridors narrow. Thousands could be saved, but millions would die. Joran clenched his fists. We came to break the siege. Now we're breaking the world. The echo in hyperspace hours passed. The fleet worked feverishly to stabilize the planet's orbit, deploying gravitic anchors and field stabilizers. But the deeper threat was not planetary, it was cosmic. The telepaths who had survived the scream began reporting visions. Not dreams, not hallucination, structured impressions. Vast hives stretching across dimensions. Armadas of living ships, each one larger than a dreadnought, their hulls grown from the bones of dead stars. They're not just coming, Sira said, her voice hoarse. They're preparing, they know our weapons, they know we can shatter hyperspace, and they are adapting. The dreadnought captains gathered in council. The hollow chamber flickered with their weary faces. We've revealed our hand, Admiral Vera said. The shatter beams were our last secret. Now the hive knows they will counter, and when they arrive they will not come piecemeal. They will come as one. The first signs the sensors caught it first. A faint ripple far beyond the system. A distortion in hyperspace, subtle but deliberate, then another, and another. They're triangulating, Sira whispered. They're weaving a net. When it closes, we will be trapped. The dreadnoughts turned their shatter beams outward, firing into the void, trying to disrupt the forming pathways. Each pulse tore at hyperspace, collapsing corridors before they could stabilize. But the hive was relentless. For every path destroyed, two more emerged. The crews grew restless. Sleep was impossible. The telepaths screamed in their bunks, tormented by visions of the hive's approach. Engineers worked until their hands bled, patching systems that were never meant to endure this strain. And then, the first enemy ship appeared. It did not emerge from a rift. It slid into real space, as though hyperspace had simply bent to allow it passage. Its hull was black, ridged with spines that pulsed with green fire. It was not large, smaller than a dreadnought, but it was fast, faster than anything humanity had ever seen. The sword of Saul fired, the beam struck true, the ship dissolved into ash, but Sira collapsed again, clutching her head. That wasn't a scout, that was a probe. They're testing us, measuring our response. The gathering storm, the council reconvened. The alien survivors begged for protection, their voices trembling through the comms. The dreadnought captains argued, should they stay and defend or retreat and regroup? We cannot abandon them, Joran said. We came here to save them. If we leave now, they will be erased. But if we stay, Vera countered, we risk the fleet, and if the fleet dies, humanity dies with it. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Outside, hyperspace rippled again. This time not a probe, not a scout, a formation, 10 ships sliding into real space in perfect synchronization. Their hulls glowed with emerald fire, their weapons already charging. The dreadnoughts turned to meet them. And in that moment, Sira's voice cut through the chaos. They're not just attacking, they're learning. Every shot we fire, every maneuver we make, they're recording, they will adapt. And when the main fleet arrives, they will be ready. The choice the dreadnoughts fired. Space itself screamed as shatter beams tore through the alien formation. 5 ships disintegrated, 2 were crippled, but 3 survived, their hulls shimmering with a strange distortion. They're shielding against the beams, Joran said, horror in his voice. They're evolving already. The council faced the impossible. Stay and fight and risk annihilation. Retreat and doom the alien world they had sworn to protect. Admiral Vera's voice was cold, resolute. We hold, we fight. Humanity's dreadnoughts were built for this moment. If we fall buying time. Time for the refugees. Time for the galaxy to prepare. The fleet aligned, the shatter beams charged, the alien formation advanced, and in the depths of hyperspace the true hive stirred. The war had begun. Would you like me to make Chapter 10 even longer with multiple interwoven perspectives, fleet command, alien civilians, telepaths, and the hive itself, to escalate the tension further? Chapter 10. The siege fractures the alien world of Calith burned beneath the emerald glow of the invaders. Cities already scarred from years of siege trembled as the new wave of ships descended. Humanity's dreadnoughts, massive angular fortresses of steel and plasma, hovered in orbit, their shattered beams humming with lethal promise. Yet even their presence felt fragile against the tide that was coming. Fleet Command Admiral Vera stood at the command dais of the Sword of Saul, her eyes locked on the tactical display. 10 enemy ships had become 20. 20 had become 50. Each arrival was smoother, faster, more precise. Hyperspace itself seemed to bend willingly for them, as if the universe conspired against humanity. Pattern recognition confirms, Sira whispered, her voice trembling as she pressed her hands to her temples. They're learning. Every maneuver we make, they replicate. Every weakness we exploit, they seal. They are becoming us. Joran slammed his fist against the console. Then we must become something they cannot predict, something beyond calculation. But Vera's gaze was cold. Unpredictability is chaos. Chaos risks the fleet, and if the fleet dies, Calith dies with it. The dreadnought captains exchanged glances. The weight of billions pressed down on them. Every decision was a knife's edge. Alien civilians on Calith's surface. The alien refugees huddled in the ruins of their once proud capital. Their crystalline towers had collapsed into jagged rubble, their luminous rivers poisoned by the invaders' weapons. Mothers clutched children whose eyes glowed faintly with the psychic resonance of their species. Elders whispered prayers to stars that no longer answered. Above them, the sky tore open as emerald fire rained down. Humanity's dreadnoughts intercepted, beams of white shatterlight carving through the heavens. The ground shook with each impact. To the civilians, the dreadnoughts were gods, terrible, magnificent gods who held back annihilation with sheer defiance. Yet even gods could bleed. Sira's vision Sira collapsed again, writhing on the deck of the Sword of Saul. Her mind was not her own, it was a battlefield. The hive pressed against her consciousness, probing, dissecting, learning. She saw flashes, endless rows of emerald ships, vast living engines pulsing in hyperspace, a consciousness so vast it dwarfed suns. They are not ships, she gasped. They are extension, limbs of a single mind, every vessel destroyed is nothing. The hive feels no loss, it only grows stronger. Her words chilled the command deck. Humanity's dreadnoughts were titans of war, but titans could not kill a god. The hive's perspective in the depths of hyperspace, the hive stirred. It did not think as mortals did. It did not rage or fear or hope. It calculated. It absorbed. It evolved. Humanity's shatter beams were cataloged, dissected, neutralized. Their formations were mapped, their strategies mirrored. Every battle was a lesson. Every death was data. The hive did not see enemies, it saw puzzles, and puzzles were meant to be solved. The breaking point, the dreadnoughts fired again. Shatter beams lanced across the void, tearing through emerald hulls. 10 ships fell, but 20 more emerged from hyperspace, their shields shimmering with new distortions. The beams bent, refracted, weakened. They've adapted, Joran whispered. Already. The dreadnoughts shifted formation, desperate to find new angles. But the hive mirrored them perfectly, a reflection in emerald fire. Humanity's greatest weapons were becoming obsolete before their eyes. On Calith's surface, the civilians screamed as the sky split open. Emerald fire slipped past the dreadnoughts, striking the city. Towers collapsed, the ground cracked. The refugees scattered, their voices rising in a chorus of despair. The choice revisited. Admiral Vera's voice cut through the chaos. We cannot win this battle, not like this, but we can buy time. Humanity's dreadnoughts were built to shatter hyperspace itself. If we unleash that power, we may cripple their advance, but the cost will be catastrophic. Sira's eyes widened. You mean to fracture hyperspace, to tear it apart? That will destroy everything, ships, worlds, even minds. The hive will suffer, yes, but so will Calith, so will us. Vera's jaw tightened. Better to risk annihilation than to guarantee it. The council fell silent. The decision loomed like a blade over their throats. To fracture hyperspace was to gamble with existence itself, but to hold back was to surrender the galaxy to the hive. The final signal as the dreadnoughts aligned, Sierra screamed. Her voice was not her own, it was the hive's. We see you, we know you, you cannot hide, you cannot win, you are already ours. The dreadnought captains froze. For the first time they felt the hive's gaze upon them, not as ships, not as soldiers, but as prey. And in that moment Admiral Vera gave the order, prepare the hyperspace shatter. Humanity's dreadnoughts will tear the void itself. If we fall breaking the hive. The fleet moved. The shatter beams charged, hyperspace trembled, and Caliph held its breath. Would you like Chapter 11 to show the actual fracturing of hyperspace, where reality itself begins to collapse, with perspectives from both the human fleet and the hive's consciousness, as the tension peaks toward the finale? We need to write Chapter 11 of 12, following the provided story so far. The chapter should be very long, extremely detailed, suspenseful, building extreme tension. The output should be only narrative text. The chapter should show the actual fracturing of hyperspace, with perspectives from both human fleet and hive consciousness, as tension peaks toward finale. The story so far ends with Admiral Vera ordering the hyperspace shatter. So Chapter 11 begins with the execution of that order. Must be consistent with previous chapters' tone and detail. Chapter 11. The fracture of reality, the order hung in the void like a dying star's final exhalation. Initiate. Admiral Vera's voice carried no tremor, no hesitation, only the cold certainty of a woman who had already died 1,000 times in her mind, rehearsing this moment until the fear became ash. Her fingers pressed against the command console, and the dreadnought hammer of Saul responded with a shudder that traveled through every deck, every bulkhead, every bone of every crew member. The shatter beams were not weapons, they were wounds. Humanity had discovered them in the ruins of a dead civilization, a species that had learned to treat spacetime as a membrane to be pierced, folded, and ultimately ruptured. The beams worked by injecting a destabilizing frequency directly into the quantum foam that underpinned hyperspace, causing the extra dimensions to vibrate at dissonant harmonics until they tore themselves apart. It was not destruction in the conventional sense. It was unmaking. And now, 4 dreadnoughts aligned in a tetrahedral formation around Caliph's orbit, their forward emitters glowing with a light that had no color, because color was a property of the universe they were about to shatter. Chief Engineer Ridden stood in the core chamber of the Hammer of Saul, watching the energy readings climb past every safety threshold. His hands gripped the railing so hard that his knuckles had gone white, then yellow, then a pale blue that matched the emergency lighting. The chamber was a cathedral of machinery, spires of superconducting alloy, conduits throbbing with plasma, crystals that sang at frequencies beyond hearing. And at the center, the shatter emitter, a sphere of impossibly smooth black obsidian, floating in a containment field, its surface beginning to crawl with patterns that looked like cracks in reality. Power at 87%, he reported, his voice steady despite the sweat that dripped from his chin. Coherence holding, but the feedback loop is nonlinear. We're seeing subspace echoes. The hive is, he paused, staring at the readings. They're trying to learn the frequency. Vera's voice came through his earpiece. Can they? Not if we detonate before they decode it, but if we hold too long, they'll not only learn it, they'll reflect it. Ridden's throat tightened. Admiral, we've never tested this at full power. The theoretical models suggest that a hyperspace fracture of this magnitude could propagate faster than light. It might not stop at the hive fleet. It might spread into normal space. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't, Vera replied. Continue charging. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Commander Joran watched the tactical display with a numbness that had become his constant companion. The hive fleet had stopped moving. That was the most terrifying part. They had been relentless, adaptive, predatory, and now they hung in the void like a forest of emerald thorns, waiting. They're watching, he said. Not attacking, just watching. Captain Elias Mendez stood beside him, his face illuminated by the sickly green glow of the tactical hologram. They know what we're doing. They're calculating the odds. Can they stop us? Mendez shook his head. If they could, they would have already. No, they're waiting to see if we survive our own weapon. He turned to Joran, and for the first time the captain's composure cracked. I've seen the reports from the first-generation Shatter tests. The test subjects, the volunteers, they didn't die. They unbecame. Their bodies remained, but the consciousness was gone. The doctors said it was like their souls had been erased from the universe. Joran felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. And this is the same technology, amplified, focused, targeted. Mendez's voice dropped to a whisper. We're about to commit genocide on a scale that makes the Hive look merciful. And we're doing it to save ourselves. The tactical display flickered. The shatter beams were now at 94% power. Sira stood on the observation deck of the Caliph Council spire, her hands pressed against the transparent wall that separated her from the abyss. Below her, the city burned. Above her, the dreadnoughts glowed with an inner fire that seemed to consume the stars themselves. And in her mind, the Hive screamed, not with fear, with anticipation. We see you, the voice had said. But that was not the whole truth. The Hive had always seen, always known, always understood, but they had never felt, not until now. The shatter beams had awakened something in the collective consciousness. A curiosity, a hunger for a new kind of data. What is this? The Hive asked, not through words but through pressure, through weight, through the unbearable intimacy of a trillion minds brushing against her own. You seek to destroy the path, but the path is everything. Without the path there is no journey. Without the journey there is no destination. Without the destination there is no purpose. Sira tried to pull away, but the connection held. She was a bridge and the Hive was crossing. You are not like the others, the Hive continued. You feel the fracture. You taste the unmaking. You are afraid, but fear is data. Pain is data, death is data, and data is the only truth. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, her voice echoed in the Hive mind, trembling and small. Why are you doing this? Why attack us? The Hive paused. For a fraction of a second, the pressure lifted and Sira felt something like confusion, or what passed for confusion in a consciousness that had never known doubt. Because we are incomplete, the Hive answered. And you are the missing piece. The shatter beams reached full power. In the core chamber of the Hammer of Saul, the obsidian sphere began to weep. Not liquid, light. A light that was the absence of light, a darkness that radiated, a void that gave birth to emptiness. The cracks on its surface deepened, and through them Ridden could see something else, a place that was not a place, a time that was not a time, a geometry that existed only as a wound in the fabric of reality. Admiral, he said, his voice barely a whisper, the containment field is breaking down. We have to fire now. Confirmed, Vera replied. All dreadnoughts synchronize, firing in 5 seconds. The countdown began, and with each second the universe seemed to stretch. The Hive fleet remained motionless, their emerald shields flickering with a new pattern, a pattern that Ridden recognized with dread. They're not trying to block the shatter, he said. They're tuning themselves to it. They want to absorb the frequency. Vera's voice was ice. Can they survive it? I don't know, but if they do, they'll have the weapon. They'll be able to fracture hyperspace themselves. They'll be able to travel anywhere, anytime, without restriction. They'll become a plague across all dimensions. The countdown reached 3 seconds, and then the Hive spoke. Not through Sira, not through translation. The Hive spoke directly to the fleet, its voice emerging from every speaker, every comm channel, every human mind capable of receiving the signal. You are about to make a choice, but you do not understand the choice you are making. The fracture you create will not end with us. It will spread, it will grow, it will consume, and in the end it will leave nothing but silence. We are not your enemy. We are your future. We are the only species that has ever crossed the barrier between dimensions and returned. We are the guardians of the pathways, and you, in your fear, seek to destroy the very thing that binds the universe together. If you do this, you will not save yourselves. You will damn everything. Admiral Vera's hand hovered over the firing button. The countdown had stopped. She looked at her bridge crew, at the faces of men and women who had followed her through hell, who had watched their friends die, who had sacrificed everything for a chance to survive. She looked at the tactical display, at the Hive fleet, at the burning city below, at the stars that had once been humanity's hope, and she made her choice. Fire. The shatter beams did not fire. They opened. 4 beams of impossible darkness lanced from the dreadnoughts, converging at a single point in the void between the fleet and the hive. The point did not explode. It did not collapse. It unfolded, petals of nothingness peeling back to reveal a wound in reality that bled light, sound, and time. The hive fleet screamed, not with sound, with existence. Every ship, every mind, every cell in the hive collective experienced the fracture simultaneously. Hyperspace, the extra-dimensional medium that had allowed them to travel across the galaxy, to communicate across light years, to be a single consciousness spread across a trillion forms. Hyperspace began to tear. The tear did not spread evenly. It propagated in waves, in spirals, in patterns that defied geometry. The first wave hit the leading hive ships, and they did not explode. They dissolved, their emerald hulls unraveling into threads of light, their shields flickering and dying, their crews becoming nothing more than echoes in the expanding void. But the hive had prepared. Their shields, tuned to the shatter frequency, absorbed some of the energy. The ones that survived began to morph, their hulls twisting into new shapes, their emitters glowing with a light that was no longer emerald but black, the same blackness as the shatter beams. "They're adapting," Joran whispered. "They're using the fracture to evolve." The second wave of the shatter hit the fleet, but this time the hive ships did not dissolve. They absorbed the energy, converting it into something new. Their shields shimmered, and then, impossibly, they began to emit their own shatter beams. "Admiral," Mendez shouted, "the hive is returning fire." The hive's beams were weaker, unfocused, but they struck the dreadnoughts with devastating effect. The hammer of Saul shuddered as its forward armor dissolved, layers of metal and composite peeling away like skin. The Indomitable lost its primary emitter, the obsidian sphere cracking and shattering, sending a shockwave through the ship that killed 30 crew members instantly. But the shatter had not finished. The wound in reality grew larger, deeper, more chaotic. It began to affect Calith itself. The sky above the city split open, revealing a vista of stars and non-stars, of colors that had no names, of shapes that hurt to look at. The ground trembled, and a chasm opened in the main plaza, swallowing hundreds of refugees. Sira felt the fracture in her mind, in her bones, in her soul. The hive's presence had become a roar, a cacophony of agony and ecstasy, of death and rebirth, of endings and beginnings. "You have done it," the hive said, its voice now a whisper that echoed through the shattered sky. "You have broken the path, but the path was never meant to be broken. It was meant to be walked, and now we will walk it together." The dreadnoughts were dying. The hammer of Saul listed to port, its engines failing, its hull groaning under the strain of the fracture. The Indomitable was adrift, its crew fighting fires and hull breaches. The other 2 dreadnoughts had gone silent, their shatter emitters overloaded, their reactors on the verge of meltdown. Admiral Vera stood in the center of the bridge, her hands gripping the command console, her eyes fixed on the wound that grew in the sky. The fracture had become a permanent tear in the fabric of reality, a gateway to somewhere or someone else. "Report," she said, her voice flat. 30% of the fleet is destroyed," the tactical officer said. 40% is damaged. The hive has lost 60% of their ships, but the survivors are changing. They're not fighting anymore, they're transforming. The hologram showed the hive ships warping, merging, fusing into larger structures. Their emerald hulls had become black, their shields had become voids, and their weapons had become extensions of the fracture itself. "They're building something," Joran said. "Something big." Vera looked at the wound. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, and she realized with a cold certainty that the shatter had not been a weapon. It had been a key, and the hive had been waiting for someone to turn it. On the council spire, Sira collapsed to her knees. The hive's presence had become overwhelming, a flood of consciousness that threatened to drown her. But in the flood she saw something, a memory, a vision, a truth that the hive had been trying to share. The hive had not attacked humanity out of malice. They had attacked out of desperation. The fracture was not the end. It was the beginning. And the hive, for all their power, for all their adaptability, for all their terrifying intelligence, were not the enemy. They were the victims, The fracture widened. The dreadnoughts fired again, but their beams were weak, scattered, useless. The hive's new ships ignored them, focusing instead on the wound, on the gateway, on the thing that was beginning to emerge from the other side. It was not a ship, it was not a creature. It was not anything that could be described in human language. It was a presence, and it was angry. "You have broken the seal," the hive said, their voice now trembling with fear. "You have opened the door, and now the old ones come, the ones who fled, the ones who hid, the ones who built the paths and locked them behind us. They are coming back, and they will not be pleased." The sky tore open, and from the wound a light emerged, a light that was not light, a darkness that was not darkness, a thing that was both and neither. It descended toward Calith, toward the hive fleet, toward the dreadnoughts, toward everyone and everything. Admiral Vera watched it come, and for the first time in her life she felt true despair. "Humanity's dreadnoughts," she whispered, "have shattered hyperspace, and we have doomed us all." The chapter ends with the fracture spreading, the old ones emerging, and the hive and humanity facing a common enemy, one that neither of them can hope to defeat alone. Chapter 12. The unmaking the light that was not light touched the atmosphere of Calith, and the sky began to die. It did not burn, it did not explode, it simply ceased to be. The clouds unraveled into strings of gray vapor, then into threads of nothing, then into absence. The blue above the hive fleet's capital turned white, then transparent, then a void that showed the stars beyond. But the stars themselves were dimming, winking out one by one as the presence spread its fingers across the heavens. Admiral Vera stood frozen on the command dais of the Hammer of Saul, her hands gripping the railing so hard that the metal creaked. The tactical hologram had dissolved into static, then into gibberish, then into a mirror that showed her own face, pale, aged, hollow-eyed. She watched herself watch the end, and she felt nothing but a vast and terrible silence where her courage had once lived. "All ships," she said, her voice a dry whisper that barely reached her own ears. "Emergency jump. Now, any vector, any distance, get out of this system." The communications officer tried to comply. His fingers danced across the console, sending the command through every channel, every frequency, every quantum-entangled relay. But the relays were dead. The frequencies were empty. The channels were filled with a sound that was not a sound, a low, thrumming vibration that came from inside their own bones. "We can't jump, Admiral," the officer said, and his voice cracked. "The fracture, it's interfering with the drive cores. The calculations they don't make sense anymore. The math is broken." Vera turned to look at him, and she saw that he was crying, not from fear but from something deeper. The tears ran down his cheeks in perfect, silent streams, and his eyes had gone wide and white, like a man who had seen the face of God and found it hungry. "Then we fight," she said, but the words felt hollow, meaningless, a ritual she performed because she did not know what else to do. The Hammer of Saul's main batteries opened fire. The plasma beams lanced out, brighter than 1,000 suns, and struck the descending presence. They passed through it as if it were not there. They passed through it as if they were not there. The beams vanished into the light, absorbed, consumed, forgot. The presence did not slow. It did not change course. It did not even acknowledge the attack. On the surface of Calith, Sira stood in the shattered council spire, her hands pressed against the crystal walls that had once shown her the hive's memories. Now the walls were dark. The hive was silent. The collective consciousness that had thrummed through every stone, every plant, every creature on this world had been replaced by a single, overwhelming voice that spoke in a language older than atoms. She heard it in her blood. She felt it in her marrow. It was not words but pure meaning, a command, a judgment, a sentence passed on all who had broken the seal. "You opened the door. You let us out. You will be the first to be unmade." Sira fell to her knees, and the crystal walls began to crack. The spire groaned, shifted, tilted. The floor beneath her feet buckled, and she saw, through the widening gaps, that the ground outside was dissolving. The streets of the hive city were turning to dust. The buildings were collapsing into themselves, their matter unraveling, their atoms separating, their existence becoming a memory. The hive were screaming. Not in sound, they had no voices for this kind of agony. But Sira felt their screams like a blade through her skull. Millions of minds, each one a lifetime of experience, a galaxy of emotion, a universe of thought, all being erased at once. The hive were not dying. They were being deleted. Every memory, every dream, every fear, every love wiped clean as if they had never been. And through their screams she heard one voice that rose above the rest, the first mind, the eldest of the hive, the one who had witnessed the original flight from the void. "We tried to warn you," it said, and its voice was fading, dissolving like a dream at dawn. "We tried to close the door, but you shattered the lock. You broke the barrier, you let them through. Forgive us. We were so afraid." The first mind went silent, and Sira felt its consciousness dissolve into the void, and she was alone. Above, the dreadnoughts were dying. The Indomitable was the first to go. Its hull had been forged in the shipyards of Mars, layered with alloys that could withstand the heat of a star, the pressure of a black hole, the radiation of a supernova. But the presence did not attack its hull. It attacked the idea of its hull, the quantum bonds that held its atoms together, the fundamental forces that kept it from dissolving into a cloud of particles. The Indomitable came apart like a sandcastle in a rising tide. One moment it was there, a mile-long fortress of steel and fire, bristling with weapons crewed by 10,000 souls. The next moment it was a cloud of dust, a shimmer of scattered light, a brief and beautiful explosion of nothing. There were no survivors. There was no wreckage. There was only absence. The adamant lasted 3 seconds longer. Its captain, a man named Heron who had fought in 36 battles and never lost a ship, ordered a ramming course. He drove his vessel directly into the heart of the presence, hoping to disrupt it, to damage it, to prove that human courage could still mean something against the infinite. The adamant passed through the presence and emerged on the other side as a cloud of rust. The crew were gone. The ship was hollow. The lights were out, and the presence continued its descent. Admiral Vera watched the Indomitable die, watched the adamant die, watched a dozen other ships die in ways that defied physics, and she felt the cold certainty settle into her chest like a stone. This was not a battle. This was not a war. This was an extinction event, and humanity was the species being extinguished. "Get me Commander Thorne," she said, her voice steady, though she did not know how. "Get me the Resolute, now." The communications officer shook his head. "The Resolute is gone, Admiral. It jumped before the fracture expanded. It's the only ship that made it out." Vera closed her eyes. Thorne was alive. Thorne had escaped. Thorne would carry the story back to Earth. The story of the fracture, the hive, the old ones, the end of everything. But Thorne would not arrive in time. The presence was not content to destroy only this system. It was spreading, expanding, reaching out through the fracture like a hand through a broken window. Vera could see it in the hologram. The wound in space was widening, its edges fraying, its center becoming a gateway that opened onto a realm of pure, unmaking void. The old ones were coming through. And there was nothing that could stop them. On the surface, Sira found the child. She was crawling through the ruins of the council spire, her hands bleeding from the shattered crystal, her lungs filled with dust, her mind a wasteland of silence. The hive were gone. Every voice, every thought, every presence that had filled her since she arrived on Calith, all of it had been erased, leaving her alone in a skull that suddenly felt too large, too empty, too quiet. And then she heard a whimper. It was a small sound, thin and fragile, like the cry of a newborn bird. She followed it through the rubble, past the bodies of hive workers who had collapsed where they stood, their carapaces cracked, their eyes glazed, their lives extinguished. She found the child in a sheltered alcove beneath a fallen pillar. A young drone, barely a few years old, its limbs trembling, its antennae twitching, its mind flickering with a single desperate thought, afraid. Sira reached out and touched its head. The drone flinched, then leaned into her hand, and she felt the faintest echo of what the hive had been. A warmth, a connection, a love that transcended species and language and the boundaries of the self. The drone was all that remained. The entire hive civilization, billions of minds, trillions of lives, reduced to a single terrified child. And Sira understood then what she had to do. She climbed through the rubble, carrying the drone in her arms. The sky above was a wound, bleeding light and darkness and things that had no name. The presence was almost upon them, its leading edge brushing the spires of the hive city, turning them to dust, to memory, to nothing. But Sira did not run. She walked toward the light. The drone trembled against her chest, and she held it tighter, whispering words that it could not understand but that it felt. "You are not alone. You will not die alone. I am here. I am with you. I will not let you go." And as the presence touched her, as its void light began to dissolve her skin, her bones, her thoughts, she felt a sudden, violent jerk. A dislocation, a tearing, a shift, and then she was somewhere else. The Resolute emerged from its jump in a system that had no name, a scattering of cold rocks around a dying red dwarf. Commander Thorne stood on the bridge, his hands shaking, his breath ragged, his mind still reeling from the image of the Indomitable dissolving into dust. They had escaped. They had survived. But the fracture was still there. He could feel it, a pressure at the back of his skull, a whisper in the static of the ship's sensors. The old ones were coming through. The hive were gone, humanity's dreadnoughts, most of them, were dead. And then the sensor officer screamed. "There's something in the jump space, something following us." Thorne turned, his blood cold, and saw the hologram flicker to life. A shape was emerging from the wake of the Resolute's jump, a shape that was not a ship, not a creature, but a door that opened. And through that door a woman stepped, carrying a child in her arms. Sira fell to the deck of the Resolute's bridge, her body intact, her mind shattered, the drone still clutched to her chest. She looked up at Thorne, and she saw the fear in his eyes, the confusion, the hope that he did not dare to feel. "They are not the enemy," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "The hive were never the enemy. They were running, they were hiding, they were trying to keep the door closed." Thorne knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her shoulders, afraid to touch her, afraid not to. "What door? What are they?" Sira looked at the drone, at its trembling limbs, its fading light, its dying hope. "The old ones," she said. "The ones who built the universe. The ones who made the laws of physics as a prison to keep themselves out. And we broke the prison." She looked up at Thorne, and her eyes were full of tears that glowed with the light of a dying star. "The fracture is not a wound. It is a crack in the foundation of reality, and they are coming through it." "Then we seal it," Thorne said, but his voice was hollow, and he knew it. Sira shook her head. "You cannot seal a crack in the foundation of the universe. You can only fill it." She looked down at the drone, and she smiled. "We have to go back. We have to go back to the fracture, and we have to give them what they want." "What do they want?" Thorne asked, though he already knew the answer. Sira looked up at him, and her smile widened, became something terrible and beautiful and final. "Everything." The Resolute turned. It accelerated toward the fracture, toward the presence, toward the end. And behind it, the door followed, opening wider as the old ones reached through. The chapter ends with the Resolute jumping into the heart of the fracture, Sira standing at its bow, the drone in her arms, and the light of the old ones rising to meet them, a light that promised not destruction but consumption. The final battle was not against the hive. It was against the gods, and humanity had already lost.